And there was a time in this country, a long time ago, when reading wasn't just for fags, and neither was writing. People wrote books and movies that had stories, so you cared whose ass it was and why it was farting, and I believe that time can come again.
Hello, and welcome back to the Think Liberty podcast. This is episode 79, and I'm your host, Caitlin. Joining me this week is Lonie Dupree. Lonie, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I am exhausted. I'm in the middle of packing up to move to Ohio, and packing is one of my least favorite things, especially lately since I've moved twice this year. Yeah.
And it's Ohio, too.
I know. Moving from Minnesota to Ohio. So basically moving from South Canada to the other South Canada.
Yeah, it's not really much of, it's kind of like a lateral move. It's not really an upgrade.
Yeah. I don't know, though. I'm moving to Mansfield, and they have DoorDash. So that's going to be an upgrade. I'm looking forward to that. God bless the free market, right?
I suppose we don't have DoorDash here, so.
Oh, it's so great.
I don't even know what they do.
Dude, so you can order like delivery for any restaurant you want that signs up under DoorDash.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, we have
it's like
something
Uber for food.
Yeah, we have something that's called Waiter.
I haven't heard of that one.
It actually, I believe it started in Louisiana.
Oh,
I interviewed for them to be a delivery driver one time because you actually had to do interviews with them, and I didn't get the job. So,
that sucks.
Yeah.
Oh, man. We also have a special guest this week, Kim Ruff, who is seeking the Libertarian nomination for president in 2020. Thank you for joining us, Kim. How are you?
Very well, and thank you so much for having me on. Also, DoorDash is amazing. I just started using it this week, and if I can just convince them to stay like 5 minutes later and feed it to me.
Right. Or bring it to you on the couch so you don't even have to answer the door.
Me at work, and I thank God for them, because if I didn't have DoorDash, I would never eat lunch.
Yeah. I was in California for some Libertarian Party business stuff, and I got DoorDash like every single day while I was out there because I had to take advantage of it because I live in a podunk town in Minnesota. Not used to that luxury. It's the best thing.
I still have never used an ATM, but DoorDash, come at me, bro.
Right? All right, so we're just going to jump right into it. We have a ton of questions, and I think it would be great for our listeners to get to know you as a candidate and hopefully support you in 2020.
Okay, sounds good.
What sets you apart from the other announced Libertarian candidates?
Okay, I get that a lot. That's a very good question. Probably the best way to distill it are a couple of things. One is the structure and the intention of the campaign itself, which is we are building an infrastructure, gathering resources, and where we can effectively transcend the lifespan of a campaign. Typically, you do have large-scale campaigns that do acquire donor information or information of delegates or, put together a policy or research, and then that information dies with the campaign itself. This is a long-term fight that we as libertarians are waging. We want to be able to have those resources at the disposal of everyone at the local, state, and federal level to use in perpetuity. So they can build on that rather than reinvent the wheel with their campaigns. The second aspect of our campaign is that we are very focused on trying to cross-promote and uphold down-ticket candidates, because those are the people who have the highest probability of being elected and can affect positive change in your area. So we're really trying to drive as much attention downward to those candidates who are talking about issues in your area and to those state affiliates to help build up their own infrastructure and build up their own war chest and make them a viable threat in their areas. So that's the aspect of the campaign itself. As far as me as a candidate, obvious fact that I'm a female.
Yeah. It is refreshing to see. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. The other aspect of it is that even though I am an anarchist, I'm very much an anarchist and a voluntarist, because I think the only ethical government is one that is strictly voluntary. What I am doing in my campaign is focusing specifically on issues that pertain to that role and that office only, and not proposing to use the abusive amount of power vested currently in the executive branch to enact my will but rather set a precedent for years to come that we only do within the existing scope of office as defined by the Constitution and nothing greater than. So my focus is strictly on what you're supposed to do as a president, not what has been done, and what policies are and how I can make positive change in the executive branch.
I really love that you have infrastructure as one of your main focuses as your campaign, because it's something I see is lacking from a lot of campaigns, not just other POTUS candidates, but a lot of down ticket candidates as well. How far are you in building a national infrastructure for your campaign? Like how many, I guess, offices do you have, that kind of thing?
My goodness. We've been doing this since July of last year.
Oh, wow.
And so
I didn't know you had announced that early.
Actually, it's funny. The impetus behind us even doing this in the first place was that we have come from the activist portion. We have worked at our state affiliate or county level, and we've assisted other candidates in campaigns. And we have been, in our respective places, John in Illinois, me here in Arizona, and also New York when I lived there for a spell. The effort, the real movement happens at the volunteer level, at that boots on the ground level. And a lot of times, especially during presidential races, you have people who come in, they promise us everything. They exhaust our war chest. They weary our volunteers through petition gathering, and then they leave. Have to pick up all those pieces and move forward. They take that brain trust they built with them. That's a huge amount of momentum that's lost. So we basically said, okay, you know what? We're not going to wait around for the perfect candidate, quote unquote, to announce. We're going to do it ourselves. We know what libertarianism is. We have been in this movement for a decade plus, both of us. We recognize that as a slate, we can be separated at the convention, and we are totally okay with that because that's the way our governing system works with the LNC and the Libertarian Party National Convention. But we're going to act like we are chosen, and we're going to do it, and we're going to build that infrastructure and continue to help people at that local level because that is where the help is most needed. Your job as a presidential candidate is to use that platform and podium to talk about these ideas and set a precedent for what we stand for, what we believe, and then allow down-ticket candidates to build on that by focusing more on the local level. I realize I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but there's so much.
No, you're right, though. It builds their volunteer base ahead of time, so they don't waste half of their campaign trying to recruit volunteers when you've already done that.
Libertarian. Right. Yeah. So to answer your original question, you said, how big is our infrastructure? We have about 100 people in the national campaign itself. And that's in a variety of roles, whether it's on our comms team, which is helmed by Aaron Pyle from Indiana, field development, which is done by Michelle McCutcheon and Tyler Smith. Michelle hails from Ohio and Tyler is from South Carolina. Those two are our co-director field development people.
You got some rock stars on your team. Yeah.
It's so awesome. We have such an amazing team. It's like a veritable who's who of kick butt activists.
Heck yeah. Erin Pyle is, she's one of the best activists in the party. I know her and she's fantastic. Any candidate should seek her out to help.
Yeah, she's amazing. And she's such a stitch. She's such a kick in the head.
Yes, she is.
She's a solid foot shorter than me and the most adorable human being.
She's the same height as me, and we bonded over that at the convention last summer.
Oh my
It's great.
I love it. They're awesome. So we've got a bunch of people in those roles fleshed out, and then they've been working diligently to build up their teams and set state directors in place who in turn have been responsible for building up their teams at a local and county level, which is, we've got people all over the place who are pulling to make this happen. And it's really amazing. I told my team multiple times, I'm like, I feel like an 8 in the company of 10s. You guys are incredible.
Well, that's kind of what the campaign is. You surround yourself with these amazing people and they do the groundwork, and it's pretty fantastic watching these campaigns, form and the good that comes out of them. And it seems like you have a lot of good coming out of your campaign with your infrastructure strategy, with helping the down candidates and creating that infrastructure that the party severely lacks. It's actually one of my biggest issues with the party itself is the lack of infrastructure and the lack of snowballing off of the election. And I'm glad to see that somebody stepped up and is taking charge on that.
Yeah. And whatever. passed the National Convention. I mean, we accept that, and we will continue to push forward because ultimately the end goal is for us to ensure liberty in our lifetimes. So regardless of what happens to us as candidates or the campaign itself, make this push because people's lives are literally in the balance.
While we're talking about, kind of got on the party there a little bit, is there any part of the Libertarian Party platform that you disagree with? And if so, can you provide some examples, things you might change, things you would leave out completely, stuff like that?
Oh, actually, I don't have any issue with the Libertarian Party platform. In 2005, when I switched party affiliations from Republican to Libertarian, and as it's evolved since, I've been very happy to see so many of my opinions and values represented. I felt like for the first time in my entire life, I saw defined and well fleshed out concepts for what I'd already been thinking and feeling. It was really like a homecoming in a large part because I'm like, oh my God, this is my tribe. They understand all these things that I've been thinking about and feeling for a very long time. So no, I don't have an issue with the platform at all. And my favorite aspect of it is actually the statement of principles. I think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful call to action and a summary of our overarching philosophy. And then everything from there on the platform is a distillation of that on different issues. And I like how they did it. Even difficult topics, they have been able to articulate it in a way that is very humanistic, understanding of the importance of liberty.
I agree there. I am a huge fan of the platform. I think it's written really well to where it's still, like you said, humanistic, but it also sticks to the principles and it's the logical conclusion of the statement of principles. Good to know that you're on board with the party platform. I think a lot of people are curious where the presidential candidates stand on the platform itself. What made you decide to run for president of all things?
Well, as I kind of touched on a little bit earlier, a lot of it came out of the fact that in previous election cycles, as activists, you have just sort of stood out of that one. You've had opinions on it, of course, but you step out of it because it's not your purview. Yours is something more local based, whether you're doing intra-party politics or you're focusing on outreach or building up a chapter or helping a down ticket candidate or whatever endeavor you're doing at a local or state level. The presidential campaign has been more just something that you were a spectator of, minor way, not something that you participated in per se. So we've typically left it just, okay, you'll pick whomever's going to run will run. And then as delegates, we'll make the decision. After 2016, I really felt like we had quite a few people who came into the party as delegates for certain candidates who ultimately, in the case of Gary Johnson, I'm not going to knock him. I think he did the best he could do, but I don't think he had a second run in him.
I agree with you there. And I think that's the nicest way to put it. Yeah.
He seemed very exhausted. Like it was a very reticent run for him. And to that end, I'm sorry that we pressured him into it basically. But I was very, very, very frustrated and angry that we selected Bill Weld.
Yeah.
Sharp and that surge of vitality and principle that we needed to counterbalance. I felt like Weld spent the entire time on the campaign trail ignoring what we believe in, pandering to major parties, and then basically throwing his weight behind Clinton.
Yeah. It was a big disappointment.
It was. And it very much muddied what we believe. And it was incredibly hard for down ticket candidates because to explain to people what it means to be libertarian.
Yeah.
And then when you have a national candidate who is doing such a bad job articulating these things to the point of basically looking like he's a shill for somebody else. So we just said, we're not going to do this again. And we're not going to wait for somebody to come in and save us. We're going to do it ourselves. And hopefully in so stepping up, we can encourage other wonderful people because there are so many awesome people in this movement to take that challenge and do it themselves. Not be afraid to throw their hat in the ring because we all have the ability. We do it all the time at fairs and ever the heck else we're doing outreach. We're already talking about this all the time. You know what to say. You know what you believe. Don't be afraid to stand up and grab a microphone because you have every right to do so too. We want to encourage other people to do the same.
I completely agree that Gary Johnson and Bill Weld running in 2016 was underwhelming, and the problems that we still face because of that run. You know, you have a bunch of people coming into the LP based on what Gary Johnson and Bill Weld told them on national television, and it's just wrong because they didn't stick to those principles, and we're paying the price for it. You know, all of our candidates have to, you know, right out of the gate, explain libertarianism on top of running for office. It's fighting a losing battle, and running these underwhelming candidates who are not the most principled is just not the answer. We definitely need more principled, you know, educated, well-spoken people running for this office, whether they are going to win or not. That's what people see when they look at the Libertarian Party. They see the latest presidential nominee.
Yeah, not only do we need principled people, but we also need relatable people too. I mean, someone that can empathize with the average American also, because that's where you need to get your votes from. So, you know, what do you feel are some of the greatest challenges facing Americans?
Oh my goodness. Good heavens.
It's such a hard question.
Everything is so very inextricably linked. So, you know, even if we try to talk about a singular topic, there's so many other aspects that play into it because of overarching government policy in various different realms and how they all knit together into this just extraordinarily binding tyranny that makes it impossible for us to do anything. I would say, at least from to make this simple, to simplify it, I'm just going to focus strictly on what my role addresses, which would be, I think, probably the two most to me, and the two things that I really, really want to tackle more than anything else are ending foreign wars of aggression. That's a huge one for me. I was married to the military. I have a lot of military friends. My current husband was in the Army, from that background, and I've seen it, and the extraordinary amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that is committed by the military, notwithstanding just the extraordinary loss of life and property that war causes. That is something that absolutely needs to end. We have a foreign policy approach where we are effectively perpetuating this consistent cycle of abuse. We are the aggressors on the international stage, and we have back that up a little bit. We, not the American people per se, but the powers that be that make these decisions, commander-in-chief and those that are complicit in it, they are responsible for creating this imperialistic notion and aggressing on the international stage, and in so doing, put the rest of Americans in incredible harm's way. And that needs to stop. That is a major one for me. The second thing is the gratuitous abuse of the criminal justice system.
Yes.
We're built on this concept that every person, regardless of economic background, station, education, whatever, was supposed to be able to have the same rights afforded to them in an impartial court of law, where prosecutors, state-based prosecutors, were supposed to seek the truth above all else, automatically chipped away at civil liberties to the point where we don't have habeas corpus. We don't have mens rea or actus rea. Confessing to crimes they didn't necessarily commit because they don't understand that they should take it into a court. They should take it to trial. So they'll plea bargain out because we bully them, we freeze their assets, we do civil asset forfeiture on a non-crime or for an unethical law is so disgusting to me. There are so many people in prison right now that have no business being, and they are in there for an indeterminate amount of time. And even if they have the great fortune, of being exonerated by some of these advocacy groups like the Innocence Project, there's still a really long wait time before they're liberated. Back that lost time. They don't get back that lost property. Who they could have been never comes to fruition because they've been denied that chunk of time. It's horrifying. So I absolutely can do it at a federal level. And one of my big things is that every single federal prosecutor, I'm going to do a full-scale audit of all of their conviction rates and study in depth every single case. And if they are found guilty of prizing a conviction above actually seeking the truth and justice, I'm going to have them disbarred and kick them out and make sure they never, ever practice law again. because we do not need those kind of people in courts. That is monstrous.
You got a lot of people that that are in these positions that they're chasing convictions because that's what leads them to career advancements, to various things like that, pumps up their resume. So they're just seeking convictions, or that's it. It doesn't matter whether or not someone committed something. You know, we have a job to do. We have to convict people of crimes. We have to prosecute. You know, that's. It seems like that's all they care about. They don't care about, you know, figuring out the truth and actually being a part of the justice system. You know, the justice part, it's gone.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's really bad. The way that it's set up is it incentivizes penalty. It incentivizes conviction for prosecutors. It incentivizes meeting certain quotas for police officers that are responsible for enforcing these laws. You basically put citizenry who should be protected theoretically by these institutions. You put them in a position of being criminals and deemed guilty before ever deemed innocent. And that is such a problematic way of thinking. It's
innocent until proven guilty is a joke. It does not exist in the justice system as we know it.
Yeah, it's just a constant fight to prove your innocence rather than them trying to prove guilt.
Yeah.
That's even like what goes on with the Innocence Project, which is, you know, they have, in order for them to exonerate people that have been convicted of crimes, they not only have to prove their innocence, they have to find the guilty party.
What?
That's how bad it is. They actually have cracked cases that have been so poorly mishandled, have been guilty of prosecutorial misconduct or what have you. They have to basically find the person who was responsible for the crime in order to additionally exonerate a person.
Now, I don't know about unconstitutional, but there's got to be some kind of law against that, right? Like, that's so insane that they would have to basically do the job of the police to be able to get out of prison for a crime they didn't commit.
The idea is, at that point, if you've been convicted, it is presumed that you've been convicted beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the litmus for whether or not a person committed a crime or not in a court. That you've proven beyond a reasonable doubt that this person has indeed been guilty of this crime. So in order to exonerate them, you have to prove that they didn't by showing who did. That's how much more legwork has to be done by the Innocence Project in order to get people who are currently incarcerated out. Most of the prosecutors who are responsible for this gratuitous misconduct, or, you know, they don't get held accountable for these things. They don't get tried in a court of law for violating this supposed Jeffersonian model of jurisprudence that we were founded on.
Yeah, no, the whole system is structured in a way that it does not help the person, it helps the system. Like, the entire system needs to be completely restructured. And honestly, like, I don't think prison is a, you know, viable punishment for 99% of crimes committed. I think it's outdated. I think it's pretty stupid. I don't think, you know, locking people away is an effective means of rehabilitation. So there definitely needs to be a lot of work done reforming and pretty much throwing out the majority of the justice system.
Agreed.
What would the first 100 days of a Ruff presidency look like?
Gosh, I love this question so much because I'm actually working on a plan. No, it's a wonderful question. Probably the first thing I'd have to do is to legalize narcotics, because I'm going to need a lot of meth to get all this stuff done. And a very good dentist as well. So,
yeah, no kidding.
The very first thing I would do, because this is just something that needs to end full stop, is that I would make sure that any person who is a political prisoner who's guilty of quote unquote whistleblowing, which everyone should do, everyone should be a whistleblower. Anyone who's a political prisoner, whistleblower, is not guilty of a actual crime that has a legitimate victim, federal level, again, I can't do that at a state level, would be immediately pardoned and have full restoration of their rights. Whatever I could do to ensure that they had back as much of their life that was taken from them, I would do immediately, because to sit on that even another minute would be unjust and cruel. And that would be like in the first minute of the first hour of the first day. The next thing, like I said, the next thing I would do is immediately cease all foreign wars of aggression. And this doesn't just include ones where we have legitimate boots on the ground, but even places where we have advisors or we're doing drone strikes, or because we have like seven different wars going on, not just in Afghanistan, which at this point has outlasted Vietnam in terms of duration, but we still have issues going on in Iraq. We've got Syria. We have, goodness, a bunch of other places as well, including in Africa. We need to pull people out of there now. And then I would come up with a plan to basically remove military influence from various different countries, because we have overseas bases in 70 different nations. Like, we need to pull our presence back and stop occupying those countries. We have no business being there. The mentality that had been the impetus behind us doing that arrived during the Cold War, is way outdated in our current atmosphere. So we need to stop that full scale. And then, like I said, I would do an audit of all federal prosecutors and make sure that, based on whether or not it was a conviction or they were seeking truth, and to have them disbarred if it was conviction that they prized above truth. What I would do is I would reduce the size of the executive branch by about 75%. A lot of the biggest lifers in government aren't actually the recurring elected officials. It's the people that work at the White House or work at Congress. It's all the lay people in those various departments that have been there since Carter or Ford or Nixon.
All the people pulling the strings. Yep.
Exactly. So it's, we changed the head of office, but we still have the same group of people just continuing to do what they do. And I'm not going to say that they're bad or evil. I think that it's just, that's their job and they've been doing it. But I don't think that job needs to exist. So I would encourage anybody who's listening to this now that currently works for the federal government, resume, and start looking for work in the private sector, because you have no business being in the public sector anymore. So that would definitely happen in order to reduce the size and scope. And then I would trim the cabinet down to about 4 positions. No reason to have all those various different positions. The Department of Veterans Affairs can be merged with the DOD and the Department of State. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, as well as like the Department of Interior and a bunch of other things, they can be merged as well. And then a lot of them are just not even constitutional. There's no reason why we need to have the Department of Education. It's not covered in the Constitution. The amendment says, put it to the states, let them decide, get us out of it. So that's a lot of the stuff I would do in 100 days. And then maybe there'd be a press conference or something.
So you mentioned foreign policy being, really important to you. It's also a huge issue in the current news cycle. Everything going on with Iran. We're kind of on the brink of World War III yet again. Mm-hmm. What do you believe should be done regarding Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the crisis in Yemen?
Okay. So with our foreign policy approach is that we have, this arose during the Cold War in particular. So out of World War II emerged 2 quote unquote global hegemons, which was the Soviet Union and America. And then we basically became stuck at loggerheads with one another because we felt that each other's ideology was not respectful of the other's ideology. And then in order for us to have peace on an international scale, it was imperative for us as Americans to stem the tide of communism. And it was imperative for the Soviet Union to stem the tide of capitalism. So a lot of the concepts that we use, like first world, second world, third world, that arose out of the Cold War. First world was capitalist nations like America, etc. Second world was communist nations like the Soviet Union, etc. And then third world were all those untapped, swayable countries. So our entire foreign policy approach had been set up as one where, in order to ensure greater peace on the international level, we had to essentially block the Soviet influence from infiltrating other countries. Hence why we had Korea, why we had Vietnam, why we were in Cambodia, why we were in the Middle East, and we deposed the democratically elected prime minister and reinstituted the Shah of Iran through the Iranian Revolution in 1979, where Ayatollah Khomeini, who had been exiled, came back and they created a theocratic nation. So a lot of the stuff that we've done and what we're observing now is effectively blowback from all of our poor decision making, in other countries' affairs. And we do so in such a way where we either give them financial or material aid, which is to say we give them, military aid or advisors, or we sell them armaments, or we give them money, or we give them resources. And we have the CIA go in and depose their existing leadership or provide armaments to guerrilla groups trying to depose the existing leadership. A lot of what we did in South and Central America created these power vacuums where something far worse is coming to its fore. And they recognize rightly that America has been messing with their stuff and they are angry at us. So we've created this very hostile international sphere, and it's justifiable. Americans are bad people, but I'm saying our foreign policy approach of messing with other people's business and constantly trifling in their affairs has created this nasty international environment where we are regarded as the aggressive, imperialistic nation that needs to be stopped. Things like 9/11 happen, where Saudi nationals, hell-bent on penalizing us for our trifling in the Middle East, decided to attack our country.
Yep. You get decades and decades of blowback.
In order for us to stop that, we have a duty to recognize that we cannot unring that bell. We did what we did, acknowledge our gratuitous missteps, and then make a concerted effort from this moment going forward to build healthy diplomatic relationships without capitulation, because we're not Neville Chamberlain. We aren't going to concede to a tyranny. Diplomatic relationships and engage in free market economics as a way of building a bridge between us and other nations, and then start minding our own business. There's a high probability, and it's very likely, and this is why it's going to be a minute before we can get rid of the military at large, but we're going to continue to deal with these ripple effects of our foreign policy approach. And so we need to maintain a strong defense, but it's strictly as a self-defense measure, being taking an offensive measure that we have been doing where we go in before we think there's going to be a problem. That's not acceptable. We can't do that anymore. We should not be presuming other people's guilt, basically, and then going in. What we need to do is focus strictly on our home and taking care of, so that if we do get attacked, we can defend our home.
Right. And if we get attacked right now, most of our, military is on deployment or they're across the world. Like, you would think from a strategic standpoint, if you want to defend the United States, like the military is supposed to do, they would be in the United States.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Like, we are very much a sitting duck in that respect. And, we can't use the fact that, we are strategically between two large oceans, and we have a hostile relationship with Canada and a largely not hostile relationship with Mexico. So we're okay. Like, additionally, attacks have really evolved beyond your brick and mortar or firearms and boots on the ground. It's really become more cyber based. And we don't have necessarily the skills or abilities to do that because we're too busy collecting metadata on American citizens and keeping them in giant servers without even reviewing them until we've assumed somebody's guilty of something. So we are about 50 years behind the times in terms of foreign policy. And we seem to make the same mistakes over and over again because we just aren't paying attention to our own history.
Well, that was a lot.
It's good to have a candidate who knows what they're talking about with, the Middle East. That is refreshing.
I'm very glad to actually hear
somebody who knows where
thorough answers. Yeah, I'm getting thorough answers here. This is great. I have a two-part question here. Well, okay, so first part, okay, you said you were an anarchist. Typically, the position of anarchists are that of open borders. Would that be your position as well?
Yes and no. So to explain,
okay.
Well, we talk about that there's every single topic has a variety of subcomponents to it because it's inextricably linked. This is a really good example of one of those. I am absolutely a proponent for the free movement of people. And I don't think that a political boundary is a justifiable deterrent or excuse to keep somebody from moving from one landmass to another. Able to do that. Now, in this country, this just wider discussion of immigration, there are a couple other topics that feed into it. I'm not saying I definitely take Rothbard's button on all issues, which is in no particular order. You can't open up immigration or streamline the process until you address welfare or public property or the war on drugs or all these other things that feed to this larger discussion. It shouldn't be an if-then. It needs to be all the things all the time. So I'm not going to take that tack to recognize the fact that the war on drugs is a huge cause of the border violence that we rail against when we talk about this in the wider political sphere. We need to talk about the fact that the assault on Second Amendment is why we have this whole thing about illegal firearms coming across the border and they're bringing violence. You guys are going after Second Amendment rights, and you guys being government, that you're attacking Second Amendment rights has created this ability for the black market to exist. Same thing with the war on drugs. Because you have the war on drugs, you have created cartels. You've created the incentive for the black market. You've created that violence. It's there. Those policies are the fault of those very things that they're trying to quote unquote prevent from coming across the border. I live in Arizona. They're already across the border. It's your fault, government. Stop. So that stuff needs to absolutely be addressed, as well as things like welfare is absolutely something that relates to this issue. Now, we're not talking about necessarily whether or not they take Social Security, because most people that come across here illegally get fake IDs and pay into a system that they never actually take out of, because of the fact that to take out of it would basically tip people off that they are indeed illegal. So they pay into it when they work. They have taxes taken out of their paycheck, but they aren't actually able to recoup those things that are taken from them in government services. They still do have access to public schools, which is something that needs to be privatized. And they still do have access to hospital visits, which they can get and that are offset by the cost of other people's insurance, which is exacerbated by universal health care. Feed into the problems that the layperson, and when I say layperson, I don't mean a libertarian, I mean like most people conflate these things, and these are the objections they have to the issue. To have this conversation with the layperson about what's going on, you need to actually systematically prove that every single thing that you object to is not an individual crossing an imaginary boundary, is with problems caused by and exacerbated by government policy.
Yeah, it's those secondary and tertiary effects that are not exactly related to the border, but always gets conflated. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly. The violence that they talk about, have these people ever been to the border? That violence is not what you're talking about. It's not there. Mostly it's people who are bedraggled and exhausted, dehydrated, starving. As they're just people. And they're coming from a crappy part of the country, not our country, but a crappy part of the world that is crappy because of our foreign policy approach and because of the way we handle these issues and how it causes problems in their homeland. Asylum, and to turn them away and to perpetuate those same policies is incredibly cruel. So, no, yeah. So I am very much for open borders. Those issues also need to be addressed at the same time in no particular order. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So I guess Borders Part 2 Electric Boogaloo. With no particular order. with no particular order and things like that. I guess one of the concerns that I have with an open border right now is going back a little bit to our foreign policy and how we've been occupying many countries for decades and starting all kinds of wars in them and killing innocent civilians and things like that. We have a lot of people that do not like America. And yes, there are people out in the world that want to do America harm. And an open border would give them a chance to just walk right on in. that is one of my concerns with it. This is what I'm wondering is, how can you open a border and then have, no particular order for all of these other things? I mean, I'm not worried about Social Security. I'm not worried about welfare. I'm worried about people using that as an advantage to harm innocent Americans.
That's a very good question. I'm picking up what you're putting down. You ready?
Sure.
Okay. I think that's a really wonderful question. And I think that's a big concern for a lot of folks. So I'm going to distill this down to a microcosm and then explain why this can also apply on the macrocosm. A lot of people who are very, very resentful and angry of America because of our foreign policy approach. And to say otherwise would to be deny a fact. The probability of all these people gathering together to wage war on or to violently attack or terrorize our nation low. And what I'm saying is the microcosm would be something like with respect to when we talk about having an alarm system on your house. That is a functional deterrent for most people. Like it de-incentivizes them breaking into your home. It de-incentivizes them coming to cause harm or steal from you. People who are hell-bent on doing those things are not deterred by a locked door or an alarm system or the fact that you have a security guard patrol your complex or whatever. They will find a way regardless. So denying other people entry into this country because there might be a small minority of folks that are going to come and wage harm is to deny all the good people that could greatly improve our culture, greatly improve our economy. A small minority who would find a way in anyway. Just on 9/11 didn't come in across an open border. They came in on visas, and they did so with government's permission.
Yeah, but you can look at the European Union right now and see the effect of in a sense, an open border and how things have greatly ramped up as far as attacks, various asset attacks on random citizens, trucks driving through crowds, things like that. I understand the sense that people are going to do bad things regardless if they're hell-bent on doing bad things.
I think a lot of that has to do with economic restrictions, stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
I think I'm with Caitlin on this, that there's a lot more factors that go into it than simply the fact that they have either open borders or open immigration. There's myriad factors that contribute to people becoming resentful and waging violence. We have violent actions in our country between citizens, and that has bupkis to do with immigration and everything to do with a lack of economic opportunity. People who
but in Europe,
and also the European Union is much more restrictive on pretty much everything. So there's a lot of, I guess, economic strife within these communities. It's a lot of economic strife between the, for lack of a better word, native populations. So it creates this, I guess, war between, immigrants and nativists. And it's just about perception when really the enemy is government restrictions. It's, limitations and situations that are orchestrated by governments to make the people hate each other instead of the government. One thing we can do, and this is kind of where I have an issue with no particular orderism. I'm an anarchist. I understand the fact that we want to end all of it. I do think that the drug war should be ended before we open the borders, I guess, because that would help people in these countries where they're coming from, Mexico, Honduras, Colombia, Guatemala. That would help those countries become more safe. A lot of the violence in these countries, a lot of the situations they're fleeing is because of the drug war in America. It's propped up these cartels. You have the CIA, propping up cartels in Mexico. I do think that the drug war should be ended first. I do think, nobody should be restricted from going over the border. I think our immigration system absolutely needs to be completely redone immediately and in no particular order. Go to a more Ellis Island style immigration system first, and then we work out all of our other issues and then go towards abolishing the border. So
that's more of a stance that I'm more comfortable with. A gradual move.
But no, I like that you understand that it's a very complicated process and that it's not as simple as just saying, hey, everyone can come over immediately and nothing else needs to be done. It's good that you recognize that there are other factors that go into, the drug war and, economic factors and everything else. So that's very good.
One of the things that you'd mentioned was the Ellis Island style of immigration. And I know that's something that Larry Sharp is a big advocate for. I have talked about, and this is because I have people in my life who have experienced this with sponsorship. I call her my surrogate grandmother, but she was a family friend, and she was living in Germany right at the time that it was going toward Nazism. It was the rise of the Nazi Party. Her father was a doctor. She had a sister and her mother, and they had sought sponsorship from a former patient of his in Minnesota, I believe. Basically vouched for them, said, okay, I can vouch for this family. I will find him a place to work as a pharmacist, and I will find a place for him to live, and they can come over here and we'll look out for them. And that's how they immigrated to America, is that they were sponsored by former patients of his.
That's fantastic.
I think that's such a good idea because it creates that sort of community. Like, I will sponsor this family.
Yeah, you're not having people come over and they're struggling and they know nobody. Like, you have that built-in community and that built-in support system there to help that family or that person stay out of that poverty trap that a lot of immigrants fall into when they come over here and they have nothing. Like, that's right. A great way to do it.
Yeah, I thought that was a very good idea. So I would like to see, we could absolutely do an Ellis Island style, but I also think that having somebody here who's like, I'll look out for you would be just incredible to build up the community, which is really the last bulwark against tyranny anyway.
Yeah, no kidding. No, that's great. And it also, helps with the attitudes towards immigrants. You have somebody who's already here vouching for them. You're going to have the community surrounding that person see that, okay, this person that I respect and I know is saying this person is okay. It's going to lead to better attitudes towards immigrants. And that's something that's a huge problem. Like, I live up here in Minnesota. I have a huge Somali population in my that's town I live in.
Too.
Yeah, and the attitudes towards these immigrants are horrific at best. And it's just really sad to see, I guess, stereotypes and attitudes towards immigrants. It's just not true. And having somebody to vouch for them and to sponsor them and to help them integrate into the community, I think would go a really long way towards, the cultural side of immigration. So what is your elevator pitch to the average voter?
My short answer to the average voter is that my sole focus is to ensure that the executive branch is returned to its constitutionally defined limitations, recognizing that the most important thing that we can do for Americans is preserve their rights to life, liberty, and justly acquired property. Create situations that would deny them of any of those things. That would be my short answer. Really, and you guys could probably attest because I'm sure you've spoken to other people outside of the Libertarian Party. Most people hate government. Yeah. Most people hate their elected representatives. Most people recognize that.
People misplace their anger a lot, but it usually goes right back to the government. Like, no matter where on the spectrum the person is, if you say, the government sucks, they're like, what? Yeah, it does. Like, it doesn't matter where they are. They can always agree on that.
Right. Like, they might have their pet issues that are more important than the other, but by and large, they recognize that government at its best is inefficient and incapable of doing what it claims to do. And at its very worst is tyrannical. So people range from that kind of thought process that they don't think that it's effective, or many times, they don't think that it's effective. They don't think that it's necessarily good. They just think of it as sort of a necessary evil if they think of it. And knowing that and recognizing that the foundational document of the country outside of the Declaration of Independence by saying, okay, this is what we're going to agree to, even as anarchists. We will stick with and stay within these confines so that we can stem this tide of tyranny and bring you back to something quote unquote reasonable. And then have you take the helm from there and push for greater because you know you deserve it. Then that is what we're trying to do. That's our pitch. Our goal is we will get it to there. Then you take the ball and run with it all the way to home. And home being ultimately, Lord willing, a voluntary society set free in our lifetimes.
I like that. It's simple and to the point, and it gets across to a lot of people no matter where they are on the spectrum. And that's what a lot of running for president is. It's about, getting through to the most people and connecting with people and being relatable. Like, you have to be able to sell it, and you also have to not come off as a stuffy politician. So that's going to lead us into our rapid fire question round. It's going to be a lot of non-political questions to help us get to know you a little bit better.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Favorite movie?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Favorite president?
Calvin Coolidge.
Least favorite president?
God, we've had so many bad ones.
Right. This one is hard.
None. I'm going to say Abraham Lincoln because he used the whole argument about freeing the slaves for political expediency, not because he actually gave a shit.
Yes.
Cool.
Love that. Soda or pop?
We say soda out here.
Thank goodness. Good. You got my vote. Last book you read?
Goodness. What's the last? Oh, actually, the book that I'm reading right now is From Cop to Call Girl by Norma Jean Almodovar.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah.
You know who she is?
No.
Oh, Norma Jean Almodovar was a traffic cop for the LAPD for about 10 years, and then she became a call girl escort. And she wrote this book about it, and then she ran for lieutenant governor on the Libertarian Party ticket in California. She's a sex worker advocate, awesome woman, and it's a really, really enjoyable read. A really good book.
That sounds hella interesting. I'm going to have to read that one.
Is it like 50 Shades kind of interesting?
No, God.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I didn't know how much detail she goes into. I don't know.
Dear.
Okay, it's like moderately salacious, but mostly it's just about her observing how messed up and hypocritical the LAPD is, and how way more ethical being an escort and sex worker was. And there's some detail in it, but it's really well written, unlike 50 Shades of Grey. And she's just such an entertaining personality. She's on Facebook. She's a lovely, lovely woman. She's a real kick in the head.
All right. Favorite philosopher?
Immanuel Kant.
Your most statist opinion?
Oh, God. Pedophilia. I think that's like the one where I have the hardest time.
I agree with you. That's one of mine. Favorite hobby?
I love gardening. Gardening is my favorite thing to do.
Best founding father?
Thomas Jefferson.
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Not something I pick, but not bad.
Okay. All right. So you're not authoritarian about it. That's fair. And the final question, what is Aleppo?
Oh, it is a city in Syria.
Congratulations. You know more than our last presidential candidate. I had to sneak that one in there, and I'll ask every presidential candidate that one.
I think we should only bake a cake if we want to. I don't think we should force them.
Yeah. Perfect.
How do you feel about companies having to put that stuff has gluten in it or not?
You mean being obligated to do so?
Right, yeah, that was another Gary Johnson thing.
Oh, I don't think anybody should be obligated to do anything. I just think it's good business practices to be honest and fully disclose. I mean, I have friends who have major issues. They have Crohn's disease or I can't think of the term for the folks that are very severely allergic to gluten.
Celiac.
Right now, but thank you, celiac. Thank you. So they do have major issues that result as eating gluten, but you cannot compel you should not compel someone to disclose information. It behooves them as a good business practice to disclose fully to their consumers what their products contain so they can make educated, informed decisions. If they don't disclose, then I do think that consumers should have a legal recourse to go after them for withholding that viable information, but they should not be forced to disclose it.
Good. We've established that you're not Gary Johnson. Great. This is fantastic. All right, cool. Y'all have hope.
Yeah, definitely. So before we go, why don't you go ahead and plug your websites?
Okay. Well, first I wanted to say thank you to both of you so much for your time. I very much appreciate it. I know it's much later where you are, so thank you for staying up with me and chatting with me this evening.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, it was. And Lonie, thank you for your questions. They were very insightful, both of you, in fact. But
yay.
You asking me some challenging questions. Sometimes I get asked a lot of fluff.
A lot of softball questions. Yeah. I wanted to throw a couple softballs in there, but I also wanted to kind of push it a little bit further than maybe some others. So it was good.
Yeah, I mean, well, you're going to be asked a lot harder questions than anything that we ever did. So
yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the things I love about the We Are Libertarians debates that Hody does is that he writes really, really solid questions that are, you initially will listen to it and you're like, God, what would I do about that? And you're like, wait a minute, your question is fundamentally flawed and here's why. But he asks the kinds of things that people would ask because they think that way. And I appreciate the fact that he's preparing us to be on stage.
No, he has fantastic debates. I love Hody and I love the We Are Libertarians podcast. They're fantastic people. They always do such good work.
Oh, he's such a stitch, too. If you ever talk to him personally, he's one of the funniest people I've ever met. He's got a really irreverent sense of humor.
Oh, nice.
Oh, my God. The things that guy says, I'm like, oh, I'm blushing. Well, anyway, to close it up so you guys can go get some rest, my name is Kim Ruff. I'm seeking the Libertarian Party nomination for president in 2020. My running mate's name is John Phillips Jr. He hails from Illinois. You can find out more about us on our website at Ruff. Are you F as in Frank, like dog barking, HILLIPS 2020.com. And that's Ruff Phillips 2020.com. Or you can find us on Facebook at Kim Ruff /John Phillips for VP and POTUS in 2020. We also are on Snapchat, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, and various other social media platforms.
Well, we will get all of those links in the show notes so our listeners can go to those links. And before we go, be sure to check out Think Liberty on all social media platforms. Just search Think Liberty on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and any other platforms you use. And check out our website, think-liberty.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Think Liberty Podcast Network for almost daily uploads of new shows. Leave us a review and tell a friend. Whether you like it or not, we'll probably be back next week.